Welcome once again to the Gaming News Canada show, and yes, that's right, I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Last month, Sporttrade announced the launch of a sports betting app in Virginia, the fifth state where the Philadelphia-based operator now does business in the US of A. Sporttrade, which launched in 2017, 1 year before the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act was struck down by the US Supreme Court, prides itself as a company that provides customers a better experience than sportsbooks. When we read the announcement a couple of weeks ago, it took us back to the 2023 Global Gaming Expo when Sporttrade CEO Alex Kane was a wealth of information and entertainment as a panelist alongside, I believe, betting insiders Captain Jack Andrews and Patrick Everson. Since then, we have wanted to get Alex on the podcast, and through no fault of Alex's, we've failed miserably. But today I can say that we've finally succeeded. So welcome to the Gaming News Canada show, long overdue, Alex Kane.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. Incredibly kind intro. I don't know, wealth of information is certainly a euphemism, but I'll take it on this Friday.
Yeah, well, listen, Alex. One thing I love about this show and what we've done here for almost 4 years now is that there are a lot of really smart people that work in this industry, and you're certainly among them. I do want to start just with a real simple question, and I think one thing that's really cool about this industry is just how people, where they come from to get here, and in your case, and it begs the question, like how does someone who was a paralegal assistant, I think literally a decade ago, end up becoming the CEO of a sports betting company?
Yeah, so I graduated from Drexel in 2017. Drexel University is like a co-op sort of infused university experience. So as part of the education, I did a 6-month co-op at a law office in Philadelphia. I learned a lot about immigration law. This was my second going into third year of university. And I was a business law major. I then added a finance major. I was sort of interested, and I still am, I think, interested in law in some ways. And then I took a finance course, and I thought that was really interesting. And I said to myself at Drexel, let's do another finance course. And ultimately, as I mentioned, that turned into a finance major. But the course that was really impactful for me was I took an options trading course. And the course was all about like game theory and making really smart bets and understanding probabilities. And I just fell in love with it. And I felt the way I think a lot of other students feel when you hear about options trading is, sure, it's a way to hedge risk, but it's also a way to speculate in a very zero-sum manner. And that was the real catapulting moment for me to say, okay, at the same time I'm learning all about options trading, I'm starting to learn about Robinhood as a user. I'm learning about this financial revolution that happened over the course of 25 years that took a cost of a financial trade from like $50 to zero effectively in a very short amount of time. And then someone showing me sports betting as a sort of a recreational activity. And I think to myself, this makes no sense. Minus 113 versus minus 104 on the other side. And I began to ask questions of can you ask for your own price? Can you see an order book of prices? This effectively is very similar to making an options trade, or it's very, very similar to a futures contract. Certainly you could do all the things you could do in that industry, and the answer is no. And that was the real impetus. Very roundabout way of answering your question, Steve, but that's how Sporttrade gets started. Because I think to myself, all right, I want to try to build, I want to try to bring all the great things about financial trading to sports betting, so that the dream world is that you could bet, I don't know, looking at the Flyers tonight or tomorrow night are offered at 50% odds. Bet the Flyers at 50% odds and they score a goal, that price is going to go up because the probability of them to win is going to go up, and the market participants are going to push the price up. And then I have that ability to sell out at that new price. And that is just so different than placing a sports bet at a sports book, even if they offer you a cash out, right? So that was the idea, that was the impetus, and that's how we got started.
I just wonder, Alex, again, I'm someone who's been very, very new to sports betting, and really just started doing it 4 years ago because I was covering this industry, and I became a partner in a startup that was going to be working in the regulated sports betting space. And for me, it's a challenge just to get on an app on a hockey night, let's say a Saturday night hockey night and Canada night, and place a couple of $2 bets on games. And we look at where the industry is today. And we had Phil Gray on the podcast last week talking about in-play betting and just all these products are available now. And Sporttrade almost seems to take it to another level where now, part of the in-play experience is maybe selling off a bet during a game or buying a bet. It's okay. Can you profile the kind of person that's a Sporttrade customer? Like what kind of people are using your app?
Yeah, so this is a very timely question because, going back to the founding sort of story, we start Sporttrade, we launch it in New Jersey in 2022. And I think it came across to the market as like very financially, like in a professional way, as opposed to like a Robinhood and fun way. And so we started to adapt to some of the reactions we got from who wasn't initially the target market, but were doing a lot of volume, and that is professional bettors. Because one of the other benefits of this sort of exchange format, this what's called a central limit order book, it's the thing that powers a lot of today's like prediction markets and stock markets and options markets. What we found is that our customers were really attracted to the price and the liquidity, and not so much like everything else you can do and how it was actually like shouldn't even be called sports betting, should be called something else, right? And so we started adapting the product, and when we did that, we started to water down the features that were the most attractive about Sporttrade. Understanding the order book, which is it's just a list of all the bids and offers. Where is the market willing to both buy and sell, the Golden Knights and their money line against the Utah Hockey Club tonight? And so fast forward to today, we're now in 5 states. We're very much viewed as, and we have started marketing ourselves as a place where a premium sports betting experience where price sensitive players can bet more at great prices and not get limited. But the reason your question is so good and so timely is that we're actually in this sort of transition period where we're going back to our roots in a lot of ways and saying, okay, the general idea was that, probability-based odds makes a lot of sense. And that as the probability changes, it gives you the ability to interact, to buy and sell more, to get out of your position in a very seamless way, in a way that you never have to understand what does minus 120 mean versus plus 112, right? Taking a traditional sports bettor out of the mix and going towards the much larger total addressable market of someone that says, when I look up my weather app, I can see 80% chance of rain. I get that. It doesn't tell me that there's a minus 400% chance of rain. It's at 80%. And so now where we're starting to focus is really exposing players to what is so magical about Sporttrade that, betting the Las Vegas Golden Knights to win on the money line tonight at DraftKings or FanDuel is almost like not even the same thing as buying them at 54% odds on Sporttrade. Because you're going to have a multitude of opportunities to sell that, to cash out of your bet at a very liquid and fair price. And because you can do that, you can now start to bet differently. You can buy them to win at 54%. And if they score the first goal, you're going to get a very, very fair cash out offer. Maybe that's 70% win probability now that they're up 1-0. And so we're in this transitionary phase where a lot of our customers right now are solely using it for price and liquidity. But what we're really trying to lean into is everything else that really makes Sporttrade exciting.
Hey Alex, why only 5 states? I mean, we have 38 states right now with legal sports betting. You and I think talked briefly about this at G2E back in 2023. Ontario's got regulated gambling now. We know regulated sports betting and online gaming is going to come to Alberta probably next year. But is this just a case of trying to get your skis under you before you move into multiple markets?
I think it's a lot of that. We have spoken with some of the leadership at the Ontario. I think it's called the AGCO in Ontario. I know Jay Welbourn, I believe is his name, pretty well. He's, I think, one of the leaders there at that organization. I've been on a panel with him this year. And I think Ontario did it right in creating a regulatory regime and an access to the market that didn't require like companies to go and pay land-based incumbents. And I think Alberta might have a very similar structure. And so for that reason, those, providences are going to be very interesting to us that we're going to want to launch in. In the US, there's a cost. There's, a significant cost to getting into some of these states. So we have to be very selective at the outset. And then even in sort of saying, okay, let's go and launch in Arizona or let's go launch in Virginia, you have to go and get the market access deal with a land-based partner. Virginia, we didn't have to do that, which is great. Virginia is very Ontario-esque in that we could apply directly, which is how it should be. And so we just have to be very thoughtful about the cost of getting into a market, the cost of supporting, the license, and then B, the resource constraint of like, okay, now let's actually have the rubber hit the road and launch in that jurisdiction. It requires, we have these checklists that are 80 or 90 sort of rows long, from, technical certifications to getting land-based servers set up to new sets of terms and conditions and privacy policy and responsible gaming and AML. And, you're basically redoing everything in each state. And so at our size, we're about 35 full-time employees. We just have to be really, really thoughtful about, okay, well, we're going to get into a lot of these states, but we can't spend too much money now before we can really see the viability of this on the back end. So it's just a matter of being thoughtful. And, we want to launch in a few more jurisdictions. Next year, Ontario is a jurisdiction we're starting to very seriously look at. And I think it could be a great market for us. A, and B, it will allow me to convince maybe my girlfriend's family that indeed I do have a good job, a real job rather, as they live in Ontario, and they have a chance to use it.
Well, we'll make sure that we send them a link to this podcast, Alex, when it gets distributed. When you talk about the business, we know in Ontario there was a massive marketing and advertising spend when this market opened in April 2022, and it feels like almost every podcast we talk about sports betting advertising and backlash to the proliferation of ads when the market opened. And we're going to have Paul Burns from the Canadian Gaming Association on an episode of the podcast either this week or next. I just wonder, like, how has Sporttrade competed from a marketing standpoint when you're going up against the FanDuels and BetMGMs and DraftKings and the big players in the industry?
I think for us, it's been about speaking most about our unique advantages. And I think the one that we have leaned into the most is, price and liquidity. And for customers that care, looks like right now I'm looking at this Utah and Las Vegas game. Sporttrade is offering 54.5% odds on Las Vegas and 47% odds on Utah. What most of our players do is they look at the American odds price. Okay, Las Vegas is minus 122 and Utah is offered at plus 110. That spread, that sort of delta between the prices is significantly tighter. It's about half of what you would find on a FanDuel or an MGM. And furthermore, we don't limit you as a participant. So we show you, hey, here's how much is available at this point in time. And we don't really have the say to pull a player back. And so that's how we've marketed the product. We've done some, radio stuff. We've done a lot of affiliate work and some paid social stuff. And then obviously we have like a first-time player bonus where you're able to earn 10% cash back on every bet you place in your first week. And so that's where we've been effective. I think the next step, the version of Sporttrade, I think we all are very excited about, is truly reintroducing or really introducing this very differentiated way of going about sports betting to a much more retail, much more recreational customer, where you could say, hey, we know you don't understand minus 122 and plus 111. What if we just told you this is a 54 versus 46% game? And furthermore, you put your $10 on Utah at 46% and they score that first goal. We're going to show you that your bet now has a 65% chance of winning, and you can actually sell at that price without ever having to learn American odds and what is the VIG and the juice and all these sort of really confusing things that I think were invented to obfuscate bettors' understanding of what they were doing. And so as we start to market more towards that audience, I think we'll start to find more success with more recreational players, because they'll start to look at Sporttrade as something entirely different, as opposed to a modestly or marginally better version of what they already do.
I think you have about 50 employees now with Sporttrade. I just wonder what the company looks like in terms of tech people or compliance people. I mean, is your employee base leaning heavily into data and tech?
So we are a very small team, as you mentioned. I think all in, we're probably around 42 folks after some consultants. I think we're in the range of 35 full-time employees. And we have built all this tech ourselves. So built the mobile apps, we built the backend, we built everything in between, all the integrations with all the particular vendors. And so we control the user experience, which is very exciting to us as a tech company. We have probably splits 50-50 between one half of the business, operations, compliance, finance, responsible gaming, and the other half of the business being product design and development. And so very lean team, very lean in terms of like compliance. And, I'm really proud that, we're launching in new states and we're expanding the business. At the same time, we're obviously supporting it on a day-by-day basis. A lot of these states require like daily reporting of like, hey, tell us everything every single player did from the beginning of the day to the end of the day in one report across 14 or 15 different versions. And that's on a per state basis. So very lean team, and it probably breaks down 50-50 in terms of operations and supporting the business versus like developing new tools and new technology.
I mean, this is still a very young company. Has there been one big lesson learned or an anecdote you can share with our audience of something that you didn't see coming, or just a big challenge at the beginning, or just something that really maybe a wow moment, or just a moment where you realize you had to do something different?
I think for the audience that is maybe more entrepreneurial, I think the takeaway I have is, I read something once where it's like, if you're a budding author and you don't look at your prior work from like, let's say, last year or 2 years ago, and sort of cringe a little bit or feel sort of uncomfortable, it means you're not growing. Doesn't mean you can't be proud of that work, and I'm certainly proud of everything I've done to date. But I think the biggest takeaway that I have as I look back, and I think about it all the time, is like, I probably, as a business, and we had this vision to build something so unique in sports betting, and we launched it. And the challenges are, we were only in one state, and we had a very limited budget, and we were launching at a time of, there was like 35 competitors in the state of New Jersey, right? So you're sort of picking the worst possible time to launch something very new. But I think at that point, I wish I would have been a bit more adamant about the vision, about, sure, price sensitive players are asking us to make this look a little bit more of a sports book. How do we do that in a very short amount of time with one or two features so that we can really focus on building something completely new? And keeping your eye on the prize of like, why are you building a startup in the first place? Are you building it to build a marginally better version of what's already out there? Or are you doing it you're taking the grand slam swing, to use a sports metaphor, and trying to build something that's transformationally different? And I think my one takeaway I think about a lot is, if you have a vision and you feel adamant about it, don't let the market convince you that it's not the right path. I mean, you sort of have to be crazy to be an entrepreneur in the first place. You have to be sort of irrational to begin with. And so that's like one piece of feedback I may have given myself, or as I look back of like, I wish I could have done this better. It would have been really staying ironclad focused on building something different. And what's really made me reflect on that recently is the insane success of platforms like Polymarket, which you no doubt have likely heard of, or Kalshi, where these are prediction markets where you're able to bet on the election legally in the case of Kalshi, inside the United States, that is. And it's all based in probabilities. There's no decimal odds. There's no American odds. It just says, hey, Trump is 54 and Harris is 46, or this Senate race is 50-50. And I think they've cracked the code in how to make that simple. And globally, people have said, well, exchanges will never work because they're hard to understand. And here comes these businesses that said, no, we're going to actually try to build a UI that's simpler than a sports book, as opposed to how they've been done before. And that's really what's made me reflective. Like, you know what? We can totally do that for sports. We can totally build a UI that maybe a pro sports bettor looks at and goes like, not for me. But you could take to, your grandmom at the Thanksgiving dinner, and she asks you what you're working on. You can open up your laptop and she could see, okay, Utah has 46% chance versus Las Vegas 54. And then maybe they even see like a nice little chart that shows how that's changed over the last 24 hours. There's very few people that will look at that and go, I don't know what that is. And so, yeah, that's been one huge sort of moment for me where I'm like, dang, I really should have stayed more true to the vision of the business. And I think with some more great fortune here, potentially, we're going to have the opportunity to continue to build the business and try that, because that's what makes us, I think, really excited.
And just quickly, you mentioned the U.S. election, and we read a lot leading up to the election about Robinhood and Kalshi and Polymarket getting into that, basically the betting game. I mean, is that a threat to Sporttrade's business, or is that something you worry about?
Not really. I think for me, it's almost like there's the infatuation that still hasn't worn off, that like, oh my gosh, yes, this probability-based odds format, is indeed, I think, not only is it understandable, I think it may even be simpler than what even DraftKings and FanDuel offer currently. And that's truly the dream. That, going back to my years at Drexel, I was not a professional financial trader. What drew me to Robinhood was its simplicity. I understood it. It was intuitive. Sure, it had zero commissions, and price was a real aspect of why I would maybe choose it over a Schwab or Fidelity, who were still charging commissions per trade at that moment. I remember seeing those ads and sort of asking my mom and dad, like, really, you still use Schwab or Fidelity? Are you sure? Like, this new app Robinhood charges no commission. And so I think for me, from a competitive element, looking at those businesses, it's more like if more Americans can get predisposed to this probability-based version of betting, then that's like really good for Sporttrade. And if there's a world where Sporttrade is one day working with, licensing, merging, whatever, with some of those companies, those are all amazing companies. And our vision isn't that Sporttrade is ultimately successful is great. It's really to create a new version of betting, create a new way that Americans think, or maybe I should say more generally, North Americans think about sports wagering. And if that happens within another company, and that other company has more resources to really make it grow faster, then that's great. So I really don't view them as competitors as much as huge validators that this could really work.
What's the relationship like for you with the mainstream operators, we'll call them, like with the FanDuels and BetMGMs and Caesars? What's that relationship like?
I think to date, it's really been those, hey, Sporttrade's out there and it's really catering to a different audience, and it's catering to a different customer, and it's a different, our players don't really care about price. And I think there's been a lot of like, we don't step on each other's toes sort of thing. I really think that at the end of the day, Sporttrade can be much more than just a B2C operator. It can really be a service provider in a lot of ways. Going back to my roots in sort of learning about capital markets, like exchanges have all these amazing capabilities. It's not just that, a broker like a Robinhood can plug into an exchange like a NASDAQ and route order flow to NASDAQ, allow customers to place their own prices and access incredible liquidity. Exchanges have all these other benefits. Exchanges have very powerful market data. So as sharper players come onto our platform and really hammer that line of, nope, Utah isn't 47%, they're not 45% to win, they're like kind of exactly 46%. I believe at a certain point that operators are going to see that is a tremendous amount of value. It's going to allow them to open up their platform to some of those customers that maybe have limited before and said, no, we're really confident in this price of 46% because we're getting it from a source that, has really had that price hammered out. The sharps have gotten together, really hammered that line into shape. And I think that's true in main lines. I think it's true in player props. I think it's true in all sorts of things from a market data perspective. And exchanges also have another benefit to the industry in that if MGM says, we're going to promote this parlay and it's, the true price is maybe 30 to 1 and they're offering 20 to 1 on it, but they get $40 million of handle on this thing, they can leverage our platform and our risk management capabilities to say, what, I have this huge amount of risk. I know it's a good position to have, but it's a little bit too big for me. I'd like to lay that risk off to you. That's to get another benefit. And I think a successful Sporttrade is one where it's not just solely a B2C entity creating a totally new way to think about sports betting. It's also sort of embedded itself, entrenched itself in the industry as a very, very necessary component, a necessary B2B partner. And so I think that the relationship to date has been very good, very cordial. And I just see a world where there's so much value we could bring to a platform like a DraftKings or a FanDuel or an ESPN or an MGM.
Yeah, I really wanted to get you on the podcast, Alex, because I thought the panel you were on at the G2E back in 2023, you talked a fair bit about regulation, and I think you got into taxation a little bit, and you got into the challenges. You talked earlier about the challenges that come with gambling, not just in the U.S. but here in Canada as well. Basically, it's up to the states and the provinces to create their own environment, and then think that has posed challenges for operators in terms of different laws around compliance and fintech, and no two states seem to be alike. You live in a country right now where, as I mentioned earlier, 38 states now with legal sports betting. I know operators would really love to expand regulated online gaming from about 6 or 7 states, I think, right now. Operators, and I'm sure companies like yours would like to see Texas, California, and Florida legalize sports betting. Taxation, we're seeing right now states are threatening to double the tax rate, and then I just read, I think yesterday, that Ohio, they're actually looking at reducing their tax rate in half and going back to, I think it's a 10% tax rate. Of all those, I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you here. Of all those challenges, what's kind of top of mind for you right now with the regulated industry in the U.S.?
I think I had this amazing opportunity to participate on a panel with Jay Welbourn from the AGCO, Ontario Gaming Commission. They're the ones that have really overseen all of the regulated activity in Ontario.
Right.
And Jay is probably the smartest regulator I've ever met, as maybe not even particularly close, because he understands the market very well. And I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think his general purview, his general MO, his general view was that there are a multitude of different ways that operators can offer sports betting or sports betting adjacent products within your jurisdiction. And that's true, and it's happening right now in Texas, it's happening in California, it's happening in Florida. There are players out there that are risking money on the outcome or outcomes of sporting event or events. It's happening. And it's also happening in regulated markets. And so taking the view of, as a regulator, okay, I'm here to compete in a way, and I'm here to demonstrate not only to the legislator that endowed me with this capability and this duty to authorize and regulate sports betting, but I'm here to demonstrate to operators that they should make the choice to come into my market the right way, because there are a myriad of ways to come into every single market, not the right way, not the regulated way. And I think there's going to start to be a switch. I think the Ohio news about potentially lowering the tax, who knows if it goes anywhere, but I think it reflects an inflection point in the regulated industry, specifically in sports betting, specifically in the United States, where everyone is beginning to open their eyes and understand that there's a ton of ways that you can operate and offer sports betting as an operator in these states outside of the regulated regime. And so it's now on regulators and legislators to validate the decision that some of these good actors are making, to doing it the right way, to pay the tax, to pay the license fee, to pay the market access rate, to get all the audits. I mean, the amount of money, time, and resources we spend to follow all these laws, it's incredibly high. And so I think we're going to start to see a shift from penalizing or scrutinizing those that are already following all the rules and taking a lot of that inertia and directing at those that don't. And what that will do, both from a legislative and regulatory perspective, will only be to validate the decisions that the regulated guys are making by coming into the market through the front door. And it also increases the value of the license, increases the value of getting that piece of paper and saying you can operate in the state of X or in Ontario or in Alberta eventually if they decide to legalize next year. Because what's happening currently, pre this sort of inflection point that we're seeing in Ohio and we're going to see in some other states, is that the value of these regulated licenses have been getting diluted. We're only validating, we're only rewarding those that have said, I'm so glad I pulled out of the regulated market. They just passed another tax on you. You're paying yet another tax. I'm paying zero. And I think the industry and the regulators and the legislators are now very aware of that reality. And so this is a very exciting potential time. This is a very exciting notion for me, because when we built Sporttrade, I immediately thought, okay, this is sort of a sports betting product. How do I have it fit within the regulations? I just wasn't the type of person to say, how do I operate this outside of regulation and outside of the law? And I think Sporttrade's in a very privileged position to be able to say that. We've raised quite a lot of money. We're in a very, very privileged position. And maybe if that wasn't the case, maybe I'm not saying the same thing. So I want to be clear about that. But I do think that there is an inflection point. And I do think that there's now so much attention towards like, wait a minute, why are we passing an nth rule on guys that are already paying all the taxes and doing all the audits and paying the fees and paying the federal excise tax and reporting and doing all the responsible gaming, when there's a myriad of operators in the same state offering the same product or something very similar that are doing none of those things? Let's reward those that are following the rules and punish those that aren't.
Hey, Alex, a couple of questions before we finish. And is there, just based on what you just said, is there one piece of advice you would give to the legislators in Alberta? I mean, this Dale Nally, the Service Alberta and Minister of Red Tape Reduction, is responsible for the gaming file in Alberta. Is there one piece of advice you would give Minister Nally and his team as they go about creating this market in Alberta?
Well, just by the way you've introduced this individual, and there's a department, did I get that right, of red tape reduction?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Already off to an incredible start, just hearing that alone. And I'm not kidding. I think there are, we're in this new world where I think Ontario and Jay have really led the way of understanding, hey, there's a lot of ways that people could offer sports betting in Ontario, not in a way that we don't get to regulate it. We don't get to protect the player. We don't get to see the tax revenue. We don't collect the license costs. We don't see the daily reporting. We don't understand the type of activity that's going on there. So the fact that there are operators are saying, hey, I'll come and opt into your regulatory regime, it really legitimizes me. It really legitimizes my regulatory body. It really legitimizes my authority. It really legitimizes and makes the legislator feel good about passing sports betting to begin with. And I would implore those in Alberta to take that same approach and to understand, okay, the harder we make it for operators to come in from a tax perspective, from a licensing fee perspective, from a disclosures perspective, from an audit perspective, the more we're going to push operators offshore, and our players players in Alberta aren't going to care whether they're on a regulated or not regulated site. None of them are going to scroll to the bottom and see the seal of Alberta and understand what that means. And thus that will very much dilute the value of getting one of these licenses. So I think taking the approach of how do we work with operators? How do we show you that the right way to come into Alberta is through the front door, the right way, because you have modest license fees and tax rates, something that makes sense, and a set of rules that actually encourages competition, as opposed to a very restrictive view that could only validate those that are making the poor decision of not doing things the right way, of not coming in the regulated market through the front door. And so that would be my advice. But I think based on the acronym and the name of this administration alone and this body, I think they're probably off to a great start.
Last question. Problem gambling is a topic that just won't go away, and it kind of we're recording this podcast on Friday afternoon on November 15th, and it's a week where just before I hopped on, The Athletic had a major piece on a story about a man who ended up having major problem gambling, went into major debt betting on online sports books. CBC, which is the national broadcaster here in Canada, had on their current radio program this week, told the story of another man who had experienced problem gambling. The Globe and Mail, which is Canada's national newspaper, had an editorial this week calling for the federal legislators to put into effect Bill S-269, which is creating a national framework for sports betting advertising in reaction to what some people still feel that there's way too much sports betting advertising or exposure of sports betting brands on broadcasts and other platforms. And I guess I'm hoping not putting you in a corner here, Alex, but I just wonder, any advice again on how, is there a way for the industry to get a little bit further ahead on responsible gambling, or for the industry or legislators to do more on that file?
Yeah, it's a topic that shall always be top of mind for every single stakeholder in the industry, because it's probably the most important one. I think Sporttrade sits in a very unique position that, we don't have a real advertising budget to do TV campaigns, right? So for us to say, we really shouldn't be doing that, it does make it pervasive, and it makes it top of mind for those that really should choose to make the decision to place sports bets, as opposed to almost feel not forced, but reminded so often that they just sort of try it. And so it's easy for me to say, like, hey, we should have a real pullback on advertising. But I also recognize that, again, when you think about, maybe Canada notwithstanding, because it's actually been such an incredible regulatory regime. But you take a state like New York or Massachusetts, where operators have to pay $25 million in New York for a license, and $5 million a year, and 51% tax. For a regulator to then not understand that all of those costs have to be recouped in order for businesses to come into that state is incredibly short-sighted. It means you don't understand how revenue is created in this industry. And so I think in a lot of cases, specifically in the US, there are some regulatory bodies and there are some states that have created this problem. Because the more expensive you make a license, you're still going to have operators come in. Those are operators that have, capital that's from the public markets, from the private markets, and a ton of pressure to execute and to succeed. And those things mean revenue, and revenue equals players' loss. And if you take 51% of it off the top and you charge someone $25 million up front and $5 million a year, you have to create so much customer loss in order to even get to break even. And that's before you're making any sort of profit whatsoever. And you've got marketing, you've got audits, you've got property, plant, and equipment, you have R&D, you have employee salaries, you have so many other costs after paying that 51%, after paying the 25 million, the 5 million, so on and so forth. In the case of Canada, I think it's something Jay has mentioned, I think, in passing when I sort of watched and listened on these panels. I don't particularly think that that a big pullback in marketing from a on TB perspective is a bad idea. I actually think it's probably a good idea, but I also understand the position that I'm in. I'm not a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company with a board who is employed by the shareholders who are looking to see results, and those results ultimately come from revenue, and revenue equals players' loss. So it would be hard for me to maybe have that same view if I was in that position. So I think it's a matter of, okay, if we really care about the customer and we really care about protecting the customer, and I was a regulator, I would go extremely aggressively after every single operator that is not operating legally within my jurisdiction, because that's the first place where there are no responsible gaming controls. There is nothing. I get no visibility into anything. So if I truly care about the customer, I completely eradicate that. And then beyond that, now that I'm more confident that the real only way to operate sports betting within my jurisdiction is through the legal means, then I sit down with operators and I really try to employ a risk-based solution to this, where Ontario's done, I think, a really good job of this. You're not able to communicate bonuses that make it more conducive to wagering, and saying, if you sign up for MGM, you get $1,000 risk-free. If you drive into Detroit, Steve, you're going to see that ad. If you drive back into Ontario, you're going to see a different ad. I think there was also, you're not allowed to use professional athletes. These are all things I think that are ultimately part of the solution. However, if we don't first eradicate and thwart the threat of unregulated gaming, then you're only once again validating the decision that now more and more companies are making to not operate in the regulated market, because all of those businesses can outcompete you, can get more mind share, because they are employing professional athletes or former professional athletes to advertise their product, and the end consumer does not know, nor do they care if something is regulated versus not regulated. And so we have to sort of thwart that problem first, because we can't consistently raise the bar for those that are following all the rules, because we're not actually solving the problem, which is to protect the consumer. All that's going to happen is that more and more activity is going to move out of the regulated market into the unregulated market, and you're still going to have those same articles, because I guarantee you the player that had this issue probably doesn't care whether they had this issue or doing this activity on a regulated or a non-regulated state. What matters to them is that they played beyond their means, and there should have been intervention earlier. So it's a very, very nuanced sort of question, and that's why I wanted to take a few extra minutes and sort of really explain my position. I think it's the most important thing. We do not offer online casino. I don't believe in that product. I think that product is much more fast-paced in almost requiring you to gamble in a way that's almost makes you numb to the experience. It's a thing I'm very serious about in terms of making sure players are protected and doing this, responsibly. But I also have this broader sort of macro view that we have to solve, the industry problem of making sure everyone's doing things the right way before we raise the sort of regulations and the scrutiny on those that are already doing everything the right way. So that's my nuanced answer to the question.
No, and you're right. It's just one that's not one of those 40-word answers. I'll just add to it. I mean, the wheels are in motion for a centralized self-exclusion program. iGaming Ontario is working with IC360 and IX up on that. I think the expectation is that program will be in place in 2025. And I know that's been a bit of a sore point. I think operators in Ontario had hoped that would be put in place sooner. And it also just seems to me too, Alex, that I think, to your point about New York and the 51% tax rate, if governments are raking in those kinds of tax dollars, I think those dollars should be going back into gambling addiction, mental health programs. And I also think that would be a good story for governments to tell, especially at a time where we know healthcare and mental health are much talked about topics on both sides of the border, where you live and where I live. And I think the government's missing opportunity there by taking those tax revenues that are coming in and applying them against addiction and healthcare programs.
Yeah, I think it's very well said. It's a very serious thing. I'm glad IC360 and there's that's an easy one, right? If someone self-excludes from one, they should self-exclude from all. But then you also have to have the view as a regulator that these players, and we've had players self-exclude from Sporttrade, right? And they try to get back in. They try every single way. They try to create accounts in other people's names, and we find them because we have all these controls. Is that they're going to end back up in their unregulated market. So if I'm a regulator and I put all this time and effort into this sort of regime, and then I found out that a customer has self-excluded, doesn't play anywhere in the regulated market, and then there's an unregulated operator that's marketing to that player, takes that player, I'm taking the full might of my regulatory authority and I'm completely obliterating that company. And if I don't do that, then I'm once again diluting. You just have all the regulated guys saying, wait a minute, hang on a second. If we really care about protecting the customer, we can't be blind to the borders beyond the regulated market. And so I think hopefully that really starts to come to bear as well. And again, one of the ways to eradicate the unregulated market is make it easier to get regulated, make it easier, lower the license fee, create something that the United Kingdom Gaming Commission has, which is your license fee is tethered to your trailing 12 months of revenue. So if you're a massive company, you pay a big fee. If you're a small company, you're getting started like Sporttrade, maybe you pay a smaller fee to get started. So I think there's a lot of ways we can solve this problem, but to your point, Steve, it's not a 40-word answer.
Alex Kane is the Chief Executive Officer of Sporttrade. Alex, as I mentioned off the top, this was long overdue. So great to have you on the podcast. Really enjoyed our conversation today, and we definitely won't wait as long to get you back in here again.
I really appreciate the opportunity, Steve. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find us at gamingnewscanada.ca. You can also find our interview with Alex and our other podcasts on the various podcast platforms. Thanks to everyone who listens to and supports this podcast, and we will see everybody again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.